Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Geopolitical Cousins podcast. Emergency episode. The U.S. bombed Iran. You don't need to hear anything else from me. Email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com if you want to send in any thoughts, comments. I forward them to Marko, and I promise in the next week or two we will have an email address for the podcast itself. Okay, take care of each other. All right, how should we start? You know what? We love God. Don't we, Marko? Do you love God? Do we love God?
Yes, yeah, he's vengeful.
He makes us work on the weekends. I want to first say I'm not here if not for the dedication of both my wife and my mother-in-law to get childcare here on a Sunday. So thank you to both of them. And here I am. Marko, I know you're also fighting your children for internet bandwidth, and we'll see if we get through this. We had grand plans to do a much more insightful podcast on the trade value of global leaders around the world. And we have to delay that too, because obviously we have to talk about what's going on with the US and Iran. Unless you are living in a bunker some 30 miles below Fordo or Natanz, you probably know by now that the United States launched airstrikes on 3 different nuclear sites in Iran. Details not exactly clear on how much is damaged, everything from completely wiped out to meh. Like maybe it's not going to set them back so much. I think there's a lot of reporting still yet to come on that. Some of the more interesting fallouts, at least that I've seen, is that Iran's parliament seems to have passed, I don't know what it's, a decision to block the Strait of Hormuz, but it's not up to them. It's up to the National Security Council of Iran, and they will probably not do it. I'm sure we will get into that. I'm sure you saw the foreign minister of Iran is supposed to talk to Vladimir Putin tomorrow. Not sure what he's going to get from all of that. I wouldn't say that President Trump and his cronies, his lackeys, have taken further retaliation off the table. It seems pretty clear that they want, an end to. They want some kind of nuclear deal going forward, and they've said if there are retaliations that that there's much worse that could be done. But where do you want to pick it up, Marko?
Well, I want to pick it up with the fact that we're both totally in the summer vibes here. Game 7. NBA Game 7 is about to be played, and so the NBA season is over. So you're already in Atlanta Braves. I'm wearing the Padres famous Clemente, who died tragically in an air crash. So we're both in a baseball theme, which is interesting.
Yes, to be clear though, I've been in a baseball theme ever since Zion pulled his hamstring for the first time this season. I got to summer mode pretty quickly, but yes.
Well, and I want to open up with the Tupac Shakur quote I've been quoting for quite some time now. It's one of my favorite lines from Tupac's Changes. And I still see no changes. Can't a brother get a little peace? There's war in the streets and the war in the Middle East. Instead of war and poverty, they got a war on drugs so the police can bother me. And I start off with that, Jacob, my favorite Tupac quote, because Changes is what, 1997?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. Actually, I don't know. I'm gonna guess it's 1997. That does sound a little bit late, but my bad, 92. 92, but it was remixed later in 98. So it can't be 97 because the man died in 96. Oh, fail, Marko, fail.
You think he's dead? Obviously, there's incontrovertible proof here. Anyway,
look, the point is, the man recorded those lines in 1992. One of the smoothest bars that Tupac ever spit. I still see no changes. There's war in the streets and the war in the Middle East. Here we are. It's June 22nd, 2025. I'm sitting in Los Angeles. There's still, the media and President Trump would love it to be a war. It's not really. But there's still protests in the streets. And yes, there is still war in the Middle East. So the reason that it's relevant to start this way is because I've gotten so many texts, Jacob, from so many people who are like children who have walked into an adult conversation. And that's perfectly fine. That's why you're listening to this pod. This pod, the intention is to, give you some ammunition when you're arguing with your uncle or when you are on a text thread with your family. The fact of the matter is that this is not the first time that the United States and Iran are at each other's throats. This is not the first time that we have a crisis in the Middle East. For God's sakes, we've had 25 years of almost unrelenting warfare in the place. 1980s were a far more turbulent time for the Middle East. And as a result, for the rest of the world, 1970s, of course, we had a lot of things happening then too. You and I went through this whole history when we talked about Israel a couple of months ago. I believe one of our first podcasts was actually war with Iran. I think it was number 2. So
And
everybody,
I actually remember thinking at the time I didn't want to be talking about it because I didn't want to be just another Shapiro out here talking about Israel and Iran again. But it was the right thing to talk about, apparently. But
there it was. And so I think that's the first thing I would say. This is par for the course in that region. But I will say that this is a little bit different, obviously, because the U.S. has been circling around the idea of bombing these facilities for the past, 20 years. It hasn't chosen that until today. It's clear that Israel basically prompted this. You and I have already talked about this. Just as a recap for our listeners, I don't believe that Israel warned the United States about their intentions. I think that President Trump has to front. He has to defend this narrative that he knew, that he was involved. I think Israel told the U.S. like 2 days before. That's why they pulled those people from the embassies and so on. But the reality is that Israel is the dog and the U.S. is the tail. And President Trump, in a way, I sympathize, because you don't want to be the tail of a dog. You don't want to be wagged. And so, in a way, he had to do this to ensure that American adversaries, whether they're Russia or China, know that, the U.S., sure, it can be wagged, but it can still wag pretty forcefully, and it can drop a lot of bombs that nobody else in the world can, by flying B-2 bombers out of Missouri around the world and destroying something that's 80 meters, 100 meters underground. So that's kind of the setup where we are. And now, of course, the number one question is, how does Iran retaliate? And the question for that really starts off with this theme that I think we should hit head on. We did it a little bit in the last podcast, but I still think it's worth it. Regime change. Like, the argument, and I'm sure you've had many texts from many people from many walks of life, like my buddies on the fantasy basketball league that I'm in, Go JBL. He's been running for over 30 years. These guys are like really serious about their fantasy basketball, and I lose all the time because they're really serious about it. But the question is like, look, regime change, right? A lot of people are saying like, well, clearly regime change is an option. And this is a really important question. It's not just that some lay observer of geopolitics thinks that it's an option and therefore we got to talk about it. The reason it's relevant is that, yes, if the Iranian regime feels that they're back against the wall, who knows what they will do? That's the thesis. You've got an 86-year-old religious zealot sitting there, right? He's going to live for what, another 6 months? YOLO, let's go. Let's meet the Mahdi, baby. Let's do it quickly. So, this is where we are. And so it's a very cogent question we have to tack on head on. What I would say is what I've been saying for like a week now, for 2 weeks. You cannot have regime change from the air. It's very difficult. Most countries don't fall apart as they're circling the wagons. They're circling the wagons. If anyone inside that circle says, hey, you know what we should do? We should let the Indians come into the circle. How about that? Yeah, that person gets shot, to use the Western analogy. Like, as you're circling the wagons, and this analogy, yes, comes from Oregon Trail era, you circle the wagons, you're being attacked, you're shooting at the people outside of the circle. Anybody inside that circle starts contemplating, maybe this is the land of the Native Americans. Maybe we should go back to like Arkansas. Like, no, that person, boom, dead. Especially in a regime as brutal as Iran. So if our listeners want an example of regime change that came about from the air, it's my homeland of Serbia in 1999. NATO bombed it. In 1999, NATO bombed Serbia. 18 months later, there was regime change. But there's a huge difference between Serbia and Iran. Enormous difference. Slobodan Milosevic's regime in Serbia never shot protesters in the streets. They really didn't. They beat them up, they roughed them up, they imprisoned them, but they did not. I mean, there was like even independent media in the country during the 90s when the guy was like called a dictator in the West. The truth is, he really wasn't. Serbs actually elected the dude. If you want to blame Serbia for anything, there you go. Blame it for electing an idiot, right? But the truth is, yeah, he stole a little bit here and there. He was mean. Don't get me wrong. But there was nowhere near the brutality of what goes on in Iran. So you got two things going against regime change, and why I don't think the regime is threatened as much as people think. There's two things going against it. Number one is that they have no hesitation to shoot people in the streets on a random Tuesday, let alone when they're being attacked by the little Satan. Okay? That's the number one, and the great Satan now. The second issue is that in the context of defending themselves against Israel, of course, that is going to be very easy for them to basically tell everyone in the society, like, look, it's every man up. Everybody's got to defend the country. This is the moment of truth. And comes also, you hear a lot of people say, like, well, but if there's regime change, there'll be a government that will be more conducive to being pro-Israeli. The Shah of Iran, who was deposed, of course, in 1979, the Shah did recognize Israel and was relatively like, all right. But if you want to see his thoughts on Israel, go on YouTube, watch a 1974 60-minute episode where he's actually interviewed in Tehran. The anti-Semitism that comes out of this guy is like, is next level. All right. So like this idea that there's some alternative in Iran that will embrace, in a brotherly embrace, their long lost, cousins, the Jews, is just wrong. That's just not going to happen. Like if there is regime change in Iran, it wouldn't be pro-Israeli, especially not after what just happened. You would lose immediately legitimacy. There's like civilians dying in Iran right now because Israel is bombing them, and that's just, obviously war. I'm not saying anything about it. But the point here is that I don't think this regime feels that its back is against the wall. They do look vulnerable. They look weak. This is not a good news. They need to continue to strike Israel with ballistic missiles. But I think the first question we have to ask is, how willing are they to go suicidal? And the reason that's important is because I believe that the number one thing that people are listening to this podcast right now for is our thoughts on how Iran retaliates. Well, that will be determined by how suicidal they feel in Tehran right now. So there is a hierarchy of retaliation. I would say the number one hierarchy, this is 100% certain. This will happen over the next 24 or 48 hours. They're going to attack with missiles some American bases in Iraq. That's par for the course. They did this after General Soleimani was assassinated by the US in January of 2020. Many of our listeners forgot that because it's a long time ago. Not just that, but it was not just a long time ago. It was also right before COVID. General Soleimani was one of the most popular, if not the most popular human being in Iran. Everybody loved this guy. He was awesome as far as Iranians are concerned. Obviously, from the Israeli perspective, American perspective, kind of a terrorist, but I'm not here to judge, whatever. The point is he was assassinated while on a diplomatic mission. Very, very dramatic increase in tensions by the US. Iran retaliated by bombing some American facilities in Iraq. And President Trump said, I totally get that. I understand it. Let's move on. That's the first thing that I think is going to happen. And I think it's going to happen. And I think President Trump will react exactly the same as he did in 2020. The second kind of retaliation is more serious. It would involve attacking American assets outside of Iraq. So things like Bahrain, Qatar, the bases there. I think the US will have to retaliate against that. So that prolongs this crisis. And then the third retaliation, of course, is Strait of Hormuz. For those of you who are listening to this and wondering, why are we focusing on this? Why not on terrorism, this, that, or the other? Because Strait of Hormuz would be a way where this war would finally impact you at home. Because thus far, you have not been impacted at all. Not a single barrel of oil has been lost since 2023. It's fascinating. Since that terrorist attack by Hamas, not a single barrel of oil has been lost from the region. Fascinating amount of self-control by everyone involved. And the reality is that if Iran were to interdict Strait of Hormuz, it would interrupt the flow of 20% of world's oil. So yes, gasoline prices would rise. So I'm going to stop here and then we can see what you think. And then we can disentangle a lot of these things.
Yeah, I want to unpack some things. So there's a couple of things I probably should have added to the intro, which is one of the things that is happening that I don't think is sort of being covered up by all and it's hard to cover everything right now fairly. So I'm not shitting on the media for that. I have plenty of other things to shit on the media for. But Israel's been getting hit harder in the last couple of days. They banned public gatherings. What looked like Iranian competence now looks, at least has a semblance of a strategy, that they're overwhelming missile defense with lower quality rockets and things like that. And then once the missile defense is confused, they're coming in with, 3 or 4 or 5 really high quality missiles and causing a significant amount of damage. So that wasn't true the last time that we were on the podcast. It was just Israel spanking the Iranians into the previous century. Like, I'm not saying that it's even equal right now in terms of the damage, but they are starting to punch back and they are imposing real costs inside of Israel. So I think there's that. I think what you said about the supreme leader is really important, because to my mind, one of the most important reports that came out was the New York Times had this one, that the supreme leader has put forward 3 names for his successor if he should be taken out by assassination. And there's 2 things to note there. Number one, his son is reportedly not one of them. And the supreme leader got in trouble, was that 12 months ago, or I can't remember exactly when, because he was trying to put his son in the line for who was going to replace him. And that was the whole point of the Iranian Revolution, to get rid of the hereditary monarchy and sort of sclerotic monarchy that had come about that. So he's taken his son off the board and he's gotten 3 successors, which goes to your point about he's ready for martyrdom. He's ready to meet the Mahdi, and he's ready to sort of have somebody else take the reins. So he's not ready for the regime to commit suicide, but he obviously himself has moved in that direction. So I think that's an important thing. I want to really underscore what you said about Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and his views. The Iranian nuclear program did not begin after the revolution with the IRGC. It began with the Shah, and the Shah who gave the middle finger to Kissinger and Nixon and the United States, saying, nah, I sort of want a civilian nuclear program, with the language that the Saudis are using right now. It was only when the regime changed that suddenly the United States got into a big huff about that. And that's why, the song that you listened to in the intro, you go back and read reports from the 1980s, like, we have literally been talking about this for over 50 years. Like, this is not something new. It's the eternal return of the same. I think there's also a really important question about Iran's capacity to respond versus their need to. One of my scenarios was maybe nuclear breakout if their backs were really against the wall. I feel like I've seen enough to say they don't have a nuke and that they weren't close enough to try and put anything on the board. Strait of Hormuz, like you said, that's suicidal. If the best that they've got is some pot shots at Iraq or Qatar or Bahrain, like, we're talking about a regime that doesn't really have many options. So then, what is the big deal in the long run? And I actually think I want to go back to maybe reframe a little bit, and then we can back into some of the scenarios and the succession challenges and the regime change thing, which is 2 different people. One of whom was my wife, and another whom was a friend who was vacationing in France, which I was vacationing in France. And their questions were actually much simpler. They weren't, is there going to be regime change? Their questions were, am I going to be okay? Like, is anything going to hit me at home with this? Do I need to be worried about this? So maybe, Marko,
So let's do that. Yeah,
because I
let's do
think
that
you and I are
first.
nerdy and we want to unpack it. But I think just for the listener who has suddenly woken up and is like, oh, we're bombing Iran, like, are we going to be okay?
Yeah.
Like, is everything fine? And then maybe we can back into some of the nerdy questions.
So let's
I think
talk
we
about
can
that.
do a service there.
Yeah, let's do that. I was going to tackle Strait of Hormuz, but that's because I work in finance. I work for investors.
And let's get there, because I think that's
We
the
will get there.
actual tangible
We'll get there,
impact.
but
But I do think people are afraid enough. They're like, oh my God, we're dropping the bombs and it's
Yes.
God bless America and divine providence. And like, am I okay? Should I be keeping my kids from, like, what's going on here?
So here's what I would say. I mean, everyone who's listening to this for the oil price can wait until the end. You know what I mean? So yes, let's deal with that. So how does this become World War III? It becomes World War III because China and Russia decide to defend their ally and nuke America. And the chances of that are negative. They're negative percentages. And yes, my dear friends who know math, no, that's impossible. I'm staking a claim right here and creating new mathematics where there's a negative probability. Nobody's going to help Iran. I mean, Vladimir Putin, you posted a tweet where he's saying, like, well, you got to take into consideration that there's over 1 million Russian-speaking Jews in Israel. Like, I'm not going to take sides.
Okay, let's just, I want to quote him directly. Somebody asked Putin why he wasn't assisting Iran. His response was, I'm quoting him now, Israel today is almost a Russian-speaking country. 2 million people from the Soviet Union and Russia live there. We take that into account. This is from the president of the country that was behind the protocols of the Elders of Zion and was probably more anti-Semitic than Nazi Germany and any of the others. The reason the 2 million Russian Jews are there is because you couldn't kill them quickly enough in Russia and in the Soviet Union. And he's saying that they're going to hold off on bombing
No,
Israel because of Slavic love connection. I literally, I don't know what to do with.
by the way,
You can tell
there is a Slavic Jewish love connection. It's called the geopolitical cousins. We're showing
true.
that we can work together in peace and harmony. But that's because my Slavs were trained by the Ottomans, and there was nobody more pro-Jewish than the Ottomans. So
Yeah, they were up there. They
were up there.
They were
They were
relatively
fair.
nice.
They were nice.
The ones who sold the Jews Palestine. If you got problems with Israel today, it's really the Ottomans that you should be worried about, not so much the guys who bought it.
But going back to this issue, so just to tell everyone who's worried about World War III, it's not going to start. And it's not going to start because Iran finds itself in an oddly comfortable and familiar place. Alone. Okay, so this is not something that they have, not experienced before. All the talk of China, Russia, Iran axis, that's American propaganda, guys. And I want to turn on the TikTok camera. Sponsored by the CCP.
By Coinbase.
And CCP. Coinbase and CCP. Look, this notion that there is some axis of evil out there, that's American propaganda. And it exists so that you, dear American, can give your taxpayer dollars to $1 trillion defense budget. But the fact of the matter is that, and I hate sounding like Stephen Bannon and like Tucker Carlson, but there is no clear strategic alliance between Russia, China, and Iran. If there was, Russia would not have to buy North Korean artillery shells. They would have been able to buy Chinese artillery shells, which are better and not 70 years old. So China has been very reticent to help Russia in its war against Ukraine. Yeah, they're buying their oil, but so is American ally India. And on Iran, the S-300 surface-to-air system that Russia gave them sure did not work well. And Russia, there was a report in the media right as the war started. Iran asked Russia for help, and Russia was like, sorry, we have our hands full. So the fact of the matter here is that when Putin says that it's his love for the Russian-speaking Jews in Israel that he can't choose sides, there's a little bit of the reality that he just materially can't because he's involved in a war that has stretched his own country, but also that Russia hasn't really supported Iran over the last 20 years. Russia voted for the UN sanctions against Iran. The sanctions that brought Iran to heel and that gave us that nuclear deal that Obama negotiated. Those sanctions were imposed with Russian support because Russia does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Russia dragged its feet for years to deliver the S-300 surface-to-air missile that has now proven to be completely useless, but even that, they dragged their feet. So Tehran finds itself very alone, and that's a familiar place because from 1980 to 1988, when Saddam Hussein proceeded to kill hundreds of thousands of civilians in Iran in a brutal 8-year war, which we need to keep reminding everyone who listens to this. Please, if you want to know what's going on right now, go Wikipedia, just read Iran-Iraq war. You think that what's happening now is a big deal? This is a joke. This is a bee sting. Israel is a bee sting compared to the grisly attack that Iran had to survive from 1980 to 1988. The regime was brand new. It was far more on the edge of survival. Mere months after the 1979 overthrow of the Shah, you had religious zealots running the country. They just took over, and the United States and the Soviet Union together, locked in arms, supported Saddam Hussein's war machine against Iran. Let me say that again. There weren't many things that the United States of America and the Soviet Union were on the same side for. They were on the same side here. And every other Western or advanced country in the world, on the planet, supported Saddam Hussein, except, ironically, somewhat Israelis in a clandestine way actually supported Iran. So the point here is that for the 8 years of that war, backed up against the actual wall, not some proverbial wall that CNN is telling you about. No. Actually, their backs were against the wall. Iran did not lose its cool. It fought Saddam to a standstill. Actually, didn't really win the war. The war ended in relatively a tie, but they did not lose an inch of their territory in that conflict. including the southwestern region where the Arabs live.
Hmm.
They held. And so my point about this is that this is not news to Tehran. And if you listen to their foreign minister, who's running around, their deputy foreign minister was on Christiana Mampour, actually on CNN a couple of days ago. They referred to this war in all of their conversation. And it was actually kind of funny because Amanpour, who's in my view just terrible journalist, and honestly, I can't even believe that she's still fucking like has a platform. But fine, whatever, good for her. Well
I
done,
mean,
girl.
it's funny that that's the one that galls you. They trotted out John Bolton today on CNN this morning, and I was
Well,
like, oh my god, this
but
walrus like
but
again.
Bolton, no, time out, time out. I respect Bolton. I respect
Oh,
consistency.
oh.
No, like I respect Bolton the way I respect like Swaggy P. Like he's consistent to who he is. Amanpour tries to pretend she plays a journalist on TV, but she's not. But anyways, doesn't matter. Look, she keeps telling the guy as if she knows. She keeps telling the guy, the deputy foreign minister of Iran, sorry, I forgot the name, but she keeps saying, but this time is different. What Israel is doing is much worse than what Saddam was doing. Oh my God. Oh, what? 500,000 people died from 1980 to 1988. The regime was they had barely the time to replace Shah's pictures on the walls with that of the Ayatollah. And you're telling me that 8-year confrontation with the murderous psychopath that Saddam Hussein was not a bigger risk than what Israel's doing right now? You lack perspective, my friends. If you are on that line of, if you're on the side of that questioning, then you don't know what's going on in the Middle East. And that's why that Tupac quote is for you. The reason I begin this with there's war in the streets and the war in the Middle East, it's in a song called Changes. And what Tupac is trying to say, I see no changes. Everything is the same. My people are suffering in America. That's the whole point of the song. And he refers to war in the Middle East there as a line because if you just woke up in June of 2025 and think what's happening in Iran today is somehow news to the Iranians, then, you need to read history. So this is a 46-year-old regime. And in those 46 years, they've seen nothing but the world gang up on them. And I mean, look, I'm not standing on the side of the Ayatollahs in Iran. In many ways, there's a reason the Soviet Union and America ganged up against you guys. Because you're kind of radical, and talk about Mahdi coming back. So yeah, everyone's going to be against you. But my point is that in those 46 years, we can actually use that time period as source of empirical data. Okay, so how does a regime run by a bunch of theocrats and ayatollahs react when they're attacked by adversaries supported by the rest of the world? Saddam Hussein today, Benjamin Netanyahu today, Saddam Hussein in the 1980s. What is their reaction function to this? Number one, the regime does not collapse. The regime strengthens, it survives, it perseveres because it uses these threats to create solidarity domestically. I mean, if you are opposing the suppression of women in Iran in 2022, it's difficult to shoot you in the streets, but we will. That's what Iran says. But in 2025, if you oppose the regime while Israel is bombing the country, you are a traitor and therefore will be obviously executed, right? So like that's, if these people are willing to shoot people who protest against the hijab, let me tell you, they will definitely not hesitate killing someone protesting while they're being attacked. So that's the first thing. The regime is safe, at least for now. And as long as there are actual Israeli planes in the airspace of Iran, I would bet anything that the regime will survive that. The second thing is that because they are safe, they don't panic in these situations. And your point about the 86-year-old Ayatollah appointing successors and thus willing to meet his maker, I actually see it differently. The fact that there is now 3 successors means that the regime is thinking long-term, means that there's enough corrupt, rich Ayatollahs running around hoping that they see a 2027 model of the Porsche Cayenne. And the reason I say that is that I once overheard an intelligence officer tell me that Tehran has the highest per capita Cayenne ownership in the world. What's the point of this? What's the point? The point is that these guys are not actually religious zealots anymore. They were in the 1980s when Saddam attacked them. Why didn't they close the Strait of Hormuz then? Why did they not even attempt it? Why did they not, I don't know, like just invade Saudi Arabia? And why would they do it today if they didn't then? Today, they got a lot of less lead left in their pencil, a lot less. They really like that fine hand-stitched grain leather inside a Cayenne. You're telling me that this time they're going to be more zealous than they were in the 80s? I struggle to see that. And this is why we come to the big question. Like, if they actually cross some red line, or maybe a pink line, it's tough to see if it's really red. But I think they know where the line is. And the line is, if you mess with that 20% of energy that transits through the Strait of Hormuz, if you look at the map, dear listeners, Persian Gulf empties into the Indian Ocean through the Strait of Hormuz. Very, very narrow choke point. Many say, well, they don't have the capacity. If they can't defend themselves against Israeli fighter jets, how would they close the straits? Well, there's a problem of asymmetry here. And the problem of asymmetry is that they can't defend themselves against Israeli fighter jets, but closing the Straits of Hormuz is relatively easy. You can do it with drones. You can do it with little Zodiac boats and dinghies like the Somali pirates did. You're attacking commercial, defenseless vessels through the straits. And so, yes, they have the capacity to do that. And it's actually really difficult for the US Navy to protect the strait. How do you protect it against tiny drones and tiny Zodiacs filled with like 2 suicide bombers, like in that famous scene in Syriana? How do you do that? Like, how do you actually do it? The US would have no real game plan against this. And therefore, the US, instead of trying to open the strait, would shift towards, let's turn Iran into a parking lot. Something that people don't understand. Israel is a wasp at best. America is a grizzly bear.
Yeah, there's a couple things I
Go ahead.
well, it'll take us.
Sorry, I
a
went
little
on
bit
a
to,
rant. I don't.
No. That's what we're here to rant to each other. This is like therapy for both of us. Your point about the supreme leader, yeah, I think you're right. I think it is a sign of strengthening the regime. But I also think it tells you something about the supreme leader himself. I think it tells you that he might be willing to do something radical and take the fall for it. And
Good
then
point.
his successor,
Fair.
like, okay, the regime is in good hands, but he's 86, he's been sick anyway, he's been on his way out. Like, go down in a flame of glory, man. What supreme leader doesn't want to die a martyr? Like, this is the perfect death for that kind of person if he could do something. The Straits of Hormuz has never seemed a convincing strategy for me. And if they don't have nuclear breakout, I don't know. The scenario that disturbs me is, I mean, think about what Hezbollah did in Argentina in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like, there is probably some nuclear material that you could put into some kind of dirty bomb or series of dirty bombs, and maybe you can activate cells at different parts of the West and have plausible deniability, say that it's the spirit of the revolution that is causing groups around the world to resist the great and little satans in their, hearts of commerce and decadence and things like that. Like that's the scenario that
Can we stop there?
the most.
Can we stop there? And then we'll go back. Let's react to that. Because again, we promised to tackle the big picture issues like nuclear war, World War III. Russia and China are not going to stand with Iran. China is deathly afraid of losing oil and energy. Your point about terrorism, a lot of people ask me that. I would answer, you should 100% expect terrorist activity. And I don't want to be callous about it, but I will be. It's like saying, like, there's a storm coming, I might be hit by a thunderbolt. You might be. Probabilistically, you're not going to die from a terrorist attack. And second of all, it's par for the course. This is a regime that supported terrorism for the last 46 years as a tool of retaliation. So yes, absolutely, there will be. And they will use plausible deniability, as you say. It wasn't us. It was the zeal of the revolution. Somebody somewhere, some cell caught a Holy Spirit and they blew themselves up. Absolutely. That is going to happen. Now, to listeners, they might say like, oh my God, well, what happened? What do you mean? Like, well, I think we've seen a lot of terrorism after 9/11. Most of it is lone wolf attacks. Most of it is, what terrorists basically realized is that pulling off a complex operation is complicated. And there's many, now that the Americans in the West are no longer letting random people take flying lessons in Arizona. Like now that we've become, focused on that, it's just through evolutionary process. It's just much easier being somebody that executes a less complicated terrorist attack. And so what I would
Yeah,
say, yeah,
the,
go
the
ahead,
the
sir.
devil's advocate there is look at what Ukraine just did to Russia, or look at what Israel just did to Iran. Like the technology has changed somewhat. Now, I think the problem for Iran is it doesn't seem like their intelligence services are very good. Like they've shown themselves to be relatively poor in terms of their tradecraft here, especially in how the war has gone. But if they have any good tradecraft whatsoever, like there are new technologies out there that might allow them to sort of make a
Yes,
bigger
for sure.
indentation there. But that's what I keep going back to. Like everything I see from, I think you're right. The regime probably survives. Like all that feels right to me. But the other part of this is like, and Tucker Carlson got to this in his conversation with Ted Cruz. Can't believe I'm on Team Tucker here. But he's like, you know, because he's asking Ted Cruz why he wants to attack these guys, and Ted Cruz is saying out of both sides of his mouth, "Oh, they're this huge threat, and also they're incompetent." And Tucker's like, "No, it can't be both. Like, are they the big threat, or are they completely incompetent? And we shouldn't be wasting this ordinance on them because they can't do anything." And I keep on looking at Iran, and I'm like, "You guys don't have any moves. Like the only move you have is the Strait of Hormuz, and that's a suicide move. So okay, like you're gonna
So we
like
should
you
go
got
there.
some bases you're gonna fire out. Like it looks bad."
So we should go there. So that's where we should go.
Oh, and
It,
I also I want to implant two questions in your head while we're talking about this because
for sure.
the first is because when you talked about China, Russia, no World War III, I also agree with that. But I think the person who listens to us and wants to disagree with us will say, "But Jacob, Marko, I thought the cousins were on Team Multipolar, and the world you just described sounds very unipolar. That the United States can fly their bombers from Missouri and like just do a song and dance afterwards. And we did it. We're the greatest. Nobody else can hit us. We are so good, and nobody's going to stop us, and nobody is stopping us. Like that doesn't sound like a very multipolar world." And then the second question I want to put in your head is: Iran is not the only country that has tried to do this. North
Yeah.
Korea got nuclear
Yeah.
weapons.
Pakistan.
Pakistan
Yeah.
got
Great
nuclear
point.
weapons. Israel got nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Why is it that we're bombing these guys? Why didn't we bomb North Korea
Because they
before they
didn't do
got to
it
this?
quietly. Because
The North Koreans were pretty loud, no?
no, not really. I mean, they rushed to it much faster and much more quietly than Iran did. And because Iran's been trying to do it since the 70s, there's been way too many eyeballs on them. And I think that that's really the problem. The other problem is that North Korea had help, Pakistan had helped,
Israel had help.
Israel had a ton of help. Thanks, apartheid, South Africa.
Was it South? I thought it was France.
It's kind of both. But yeah, France
They had
gave
help.
it, and then South Africa provided the uranium and supposedly the testing ground.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Great.
So thanks. Whereas again, the one thing about Iran is, and you got to admire this, by the way, as just a nihilist observer of geopolitics, like they're on their own. Like they haven't really had any help. Russia helped them with the Bushehr nuclear power plant, which, by the way, has not been hit either by Israelis and Americans, probably because they don't want to cause Iran to retaliate against Dimona, which is the Israeli nuclear power plant in the Negev. But the point is, Russians help set up the power plant. The issue is that they also voted at the UN to impose sanctions, as I said earlier. So Iran is, I think that's what's holding this back, that nobody really wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Not Russia, not China. I mean, look, China is kind of funny in all of this. China just wants oil to transit the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah,
so they're actually...
They don't care.
No, but they're actually a factor of stability in the world, and nobody even gives China credit here. They're not encouraging Iran. They're not encouraging Israel. They're like, hey, guys, can we just all get along? They're like Tupac Shakur, like, yo, guys, there's war in the streets and war in the Middle East. Can't a brother get some, like, discounted oil? Come on. So China is not going to go on the side of Iran, and the reason it's not is because then Saudi Arabia would obviously have a problem with that. Right? And China needs oil from both Saudi Arabia and Iran. To your point about multipolarity, we had a great discussion about multipolarity a couple of months ago. And what I said is that it's very important, especially for Americans, to understand what multipolarity means. And what I said almost verbatim on our show, it doesn't mean that every country has equal power. The United States of America is quantitatively and qualitatively still the most powerful country in the world. It's just that that power doesn't go as far as it did during a unipolar world. So yes, you can still fly B-2s out of Missouri and drop a very heavy ordnance anywhere in the world. The problem is that that's the only way that you can compel behavior. Not the only, but pretty much the only. In other words, it doesn't work. In a unipolar world, you don't have to drop any bombs. You pick up a phone and you're like, yo, do X or else. Not just to your enemies, but also to your allies. So yes, you don't want to be an enemy of the most powerful country in the world. But the problem for the US is that the rest of the world is drifting away from just doing whatever they want. So this is consistent with the multipolar world. In a multipolar world in the 19th century, the United Kingdom could still show up with a gunboat in your port and say, what's up? And they did that. That happened all the time in the 19th century. So did France, so does this and that. Like US, maybe the only country that can drop this particular bomb on Iran. But actually, the reason the world is multipolar, and the reason that this is showing that we are right, that it is multipolar, is number one, Israel couldn't care less what the US was doing in those negotiations. They bombed Iran anyways. And it shows that even a country like Israel has the capacity to do something like this. And by the way, you know who else in the region could have done this? Turkey. So there's many, many countries, not bomb Fordo with a stealth bomber, no. But when you think about like air war, yes, there's many other countries that can take matters into their own hands. That's what it means. It just means multiple veto. But going back to your point about terrorism, so World War III is not going to happen. Sorry, Stephen Bannon. I know that's your big shtick now. You know, like, I get it. World War III started in the streets of Los Angeles. I loved it. By the way, I don't know if you listened to this one where he said, like, West LA is the, like, ground zero for World War III.
I didn't see that, although I went at him and Ben Shapiro on Twitter yesterday because I was bored. And
he was saying, he was
firing away at them.
You know, Bannon's point was like, look, Stephen Miller, Ben Shapiro, these guys know LA. They know West LA. You know, Stephen Miller went to like the middle school my son goes to and the high school my daughter goes to. So like, and they're like, West LA is the epicenter of World War III. And I'm taking a stroll through sunny Santa Monica, like, you know, like people jogging, walking their dog. And I'm like, fuck. It's all around us, this World War III. You know, like, oh my God, there's a cloud. The sun is gone, you know? Oh my God, please, Steve, man, come on our show. Come to West LA, bro. Let's go. Let's check out the mean streets of Santa Monica, Marina Del Rey, Culver City, up to no good.
Let's do it. Live and in person.
Yes, live and in person. Like, come on, man. Like, jeez. Anyways, look, there is no World War III threat. Everyone can calm down. There is a terrorism threat. We should expect a spike of terrorism. And in a way, it's like par for the course, man. Like you poke the hornet's nest, some hornets are going to come out and sting you. Like, if there is a terrorist attack by Iran, I think, or like Iran-linked cells, I do think that a lot of people in the West are going to be like, you know, like, well, what'd you expect? You expected them not to do terrorist attacks? So really, this boils down, I mean, we've been talking for 42 minutes. This boils down to the one thing that actually is dramatic, and it does take this to the next level, which is if Iran closes the straits. The Strait of Hormuz.
Which is underwhelming too, because as we've both said, like, even if they take it to the next level, so then they get bombed into the 15th century, and 15th century. It's like a 2-week thing.
But you and I know this, Jacob. Or we think we know this. We've also known many things before, Jacob. You and
I knew that Israel couldn't do this to Hezbollah and to Iran. So
yes, we've known many things. This is why our logo is two puppets. So just because we know
it's why we are both like, it was Socrates who says that the beginning of knowledge is the admission that you know nothing. Like, so we're willing to start over from scratch and say, like we should take that over, rather than no. The coming war with Japan is still coming. No. I was predicting the collapse of China in 2009. It's coming. It's coming right now. I hope that the listeners know who I'm throwing shade at.
But listen. I just want to say the difference between us and some random uncle or some random dude in your basketball league. You know, no offense, Ben. I love you, buddy. But the difference between us is we do this for a living. So our view is backed by some empirical evidence, and we need to give that empirical evidence. It doesn't mean that somebody random, like I got a buddy from college, Rafer. love this guy to death. I would like throw myself in front of a bus for him. He works in industrial scaffolding,
Mhm.
just like he baller, you know? And this guy trades the VIX better than any hedge fund out there. Like if you're running a hedge fund right now, like you've been humbled by Rafer, I'm telling you. The guy knows how to buy and sell the VIX like better than anyone. He's an industrial scaffolder. He goes upside down, builds scaffolds inside like crazy industrial wasteland toxics. I mean, he can build a scaffold inside Fordo after he got bombed. And anyways, my buddy Rafer, he has a really good gut instinct for when the world is a little too complacent. I'm not saying that someone like Rafer or my buddy Ben from the Fantasy League has no like business in this conversation. I'm just saying that when you and I give a view, it's at least backed by like some data. So what is the data in this case? The data is that in 46 years that Iran, the regime has existed, it's never truly tried to close the Strait of Hormuz. And we just have to ask the question, like, but why? If this is such a huge thing that they have on the rest of the world, why haven't they done this? Why not? And so the immediate answer that's like an amateur would say is like, well, it's never been threatened like this. We just unpacked why it has been threatened like this by Saddam in the 80s. Why you can't really have regime change with an F-16. That's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So why? And the simple answer is, well, their own oil goes through the strait. I disagree that that's an issue. They could just attack Saudi facilities across the Persian Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
Why not do that? And the answer for this is that, yes, the retaliation against them would be so total, and they have no ability. Like, the rest of the world is not going to be concerned about pushing vessels through the strait. As I said, that's going to be tough to do. And precisely because it's difficult to interdict little tiny dinghies and Zodiac boats, precisely because that is not really in the arsenal of the West, Saudi Arabia, Israel, everybody would just turn Iran into a parking lot. In a way, it's a nuclear option for the regime. It is their nuclear option. And except they only have one nuke, they can deploy it in the strait, they close that thing, and then they get turned into a parking lot. And there's nothing they can do. If they can't stop Israeli F-16s, which have very little ordnance, no, this is a fighter jet, this isn't a bomber for a reason. If they can't prevent F-16s from bombing, they cannot prevent the strategic might of the United States of America, which is not, like, America's not going to use B-2 bombers, guys. It will throw everything at them. 1950s, 1960s bombers, the U.S. will absolutely turn, and they will be punitive, just like the air war against Serbia was punitive. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't even strategic. Once the U.S. realized that Slobodan Milosevic was not going to withdraw the troops out of Kosovo, and that he wasn't playing by the rules of war, he wasn't turning on his air defense systems, the U.S. proceeded to degrade Serbia's industrial economic capacity. And this is what would happen to Iran as well. And so this is why we have the view that we have, for those of you listening, because we are seeped in the knowledge of the region and history and the behavior of Tehran over the last 46 years. Now, I completely concede that my buddy Rafer could still crush us, right? Because, hey, sometimes a fresh pair of eyes is better. They see something from a different perspective and say, yeah, but this time I think is different. And ultimately, if you're an investor right now, the risk asymmetry is skewed towards higher VIX at the very least, and over the next couple of days, perhaps even higher oil prices from here. I mean, obviously, we're all waiting for Iran's retaliation. It's going to come, oil prices spike. But I do think that at some point, there's going to be an epic opportunity to fade all of that, because I think that there is a gravitational pull, almost by like a giant star you can't see. There's like a black hole that you cannot see, that's pulling Iran's retaliation and behavior towards a set of standardized moves that it's done over 46 years. And that gravitational pull that you don't see, that black hole that most people can't identify, is that, like, bro, if they do this, they're going to face the might of the US. And before I stop my rant, I just want to say one more thing. I know I've said it many, many times in this show, but for those of you who are listening to this for the first time, go on Wikipedia and read about. No, Wikipedia is a great source. Like if you're just
Oh,
like
yeah.
an amateur geopolitical, you're just interested, like what are you going to do? You can't read books and stuff. You don't have time. You have a busy life. You're on this show to try to figure out what to read on Wikipedia. Well, here's one. Operation Praying Mantis, critical. So when I said that Iran has never attempted to close the straits, that's not necessarily correct. They did try very, very gingerly to dip their toes into this idea. They mined the strait a little bit. One of those mines hit an American vessel. The United States of America, in the next 72 hours, sunk their navy and attacked their energy facilities on Karg Island, to the point where the International Court of Justice actually sided with Iran many years later, saying that the U.S. was punitive and unproportional in their reaction. And America was like, fuck yes, we were. And do it again, and you'll see what we'll do next time.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is one of the things that's bothering me, like in the category of things that I don't know. Um, how is it that Israel and the United States can A, do what they've already done to Iran, and B, to your point, if they close the strait, like, bomb them into the medieval period, back to when, the Iranians were sipping Shiraz and writing poetry and inventing algebra and things like that. Like, how can they do that, and yet they can't stop the Houthis? Like,
Yeah, I got an answer.
just
No,
six
I have
weeks
an answer.
ago, like we were talking
Time
about,
out.
like,
Easy,
yeah, go,
easy,
go, go.
easy answer to that question, my friend. And I believe I already said it on this podcast a couple of weeks ago. The Houthis are perfectly comfortable living on Tatooine. Yemen is Tatooine. For those of you who are not fans of Star Wars, I'm not going to clarify that statement. You should fucking watch Star Wars.
Another thing to Wikipedia.
You know what I mean? The Houthis are perfectly comfortable with being in Tatooine. The Iranians are not.
Yeah, but it's not even like, I hear you on that, but it's not even that. It almost seems like the Houthis got more shots on goal against U.S. air assets that were pummeling them than the Iranians did. I mean, if you listen to Hegseth and not just Hegseth was like way over the top. It was gross, the level of propaganda. But the 4-star who stood next to him, who spoke after him, who was like your typical American military officer, like straight lace, like very honest, empirical data to back everything. He was basically like, yeah, they didn't even see us coming. Like they didn't get a shot off. Like
But
we
wait a
did some
minute, wait a
decoy
minute.
stuff and we knocked out some defenses, and like they didn't get one. Like they had no clue we were
I
there.
think,
Whereas the Houthis, like the Wall Street Journal was reporting that like the Houthis were like close to taking down drones and like getting shots off on
but
U.S.
wait.
assets.
Okay, but drones versus stealth bombers is different. Stealth bombers fly very, very high. The drones can be seen like with your open eyes, and you can shoot them with the, like, I mean, it's obviously, I'm making it simple, but I just don't think it's different. It's the same. It's not the same thing. And the U.S. did not commit as many assets, nor did it like drop. Why would you drop this ordinance? Why would you drop the bunker busters and the Houthis? The Houthis are very difficult to impose pain on. The Houthis are like the homeless guy in the alley with a knife. No offense to the Houthis, by the way. Don't come after me. I love you guys. Go Sand people, like, of Tatooine. You guys are fucking awesome. And, I think George Lucas himself, like, rebuilt the story of the Sand people in the subsequent Star Wars series, because they also have feelings and families, and we should think about that too. By the way, people have no idea what I'm talking about. They didn't watch Star Wars. And honestly, I don't want you as a listener if you didn't watch Star Wars. God. Anyways, look.
But yeah, go ahead.
Wait, here's the difference. You face a homeless guy in the alley with a knife. Why are you afraid of him? Because he's got nothing to lose. He's a homeless guy in the alley with a knife. So that's why it's difficult, Jacob, to, like, when you say that America is going to push Iran into the medieval age, Yemen is kind of already there. And that's why the Houthis just don't care. Their pain tolerance is infinite. That's the point. Iran and the people in Iran, and particularly the regime that has enriched itself through corruption and the sanctions and everything else, the fact that their Porsche Cayenne per capita ownership is the highest in the world tells you something. This is a regime that does have a lot to lose. They don't want to live on Tatooine. And so that's the difference. I think it's very difficult for the United States of America to conduct punitive airstrikes against Yemen. Saudi Arabia found that out during their war with Yemen. The Houthis are like, just whatever. Like, oh, you're going to bomb us? Cool. I'm going to go back to the cave. No, I don't mean the cave where, like, I go when you bomb me. I mean my home. I'm perfectly comfortable with this existence. Like, I'm perfectly comfortable with this existence. Like this is what Yemen is. This is it. It's Tatooine.
Yeah, and
Whereas
maybe
for
they're all chewing cot too. So maybe
Yeah,
they're just all
and
like,
that's, maybe we should be doing some of these podcasts on COTS too. Maybe that will make us like less like. But look, my point is that Iran doesn't have that option, and that's what the difference is. Their pain tolerance is surprisingly a lot higher, one could say, but that's because Iran is a sophisticated, educated, modern, technologically advanced country that doesn't want to become Tatooine overnight, whereas Yemen is Tatooine.
yeah. Okay. Well, here let's round out on some long term thoughts here, because I've been playing around with this notion that maybe Donald Trump would have been the perfect unipolar president, but he's actually the wrong multipolar president, and that somebody like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, they were bad unipolar presidents, but they would have been really good multipolar presidents. And I say this because it seems to me that like this is the U.S. strikes on Iran are part of the general pattern of Trump foreign policy, which is short-term wins for long-term losses. Because I don't think there are actually going to be huge implications. Like I don't think they're going to close the strait. If they do, it won't last for a long time. It seems pretty clear they don't have a nuke. If they did, they would have bared their teeth by now. So maybe that doesn't happen.
Well, at
But in
least
the
they would have
long run,
exploded it to show that they
yeah,
have
like
it.
something like
Yeah.
we're you've got bros on Twitter like reading seismographs in Iran being like, is this it? It's like, no, if it was it, like, they did their movie thing about this is going to be remembered for centuries, and it was a couple of missiles, like nice, okay, great, like there's some cool missiles, but they're not there. But the point being, the Trump administration is taking short-term wins. So yes, it's probably going to get short-term wins and trade deals with European countries and China and things like that. But in the long run, you've basically just ensured that Europe doesn't want to be dependent on you anymore and becomes probably a competitor down the road. Do you think that there is something to the notion that your China, your Russia's, even your Europe's is looking at U.S. behavior here, and even as some of these countries are clapping and saying thanks for taking out the trash, they're also saying, man, this is the U.S. Like they could do this to me. Like they could do
So
this to anyone. They're going to say 2 weeks and then they're going to turn around and bomb me. Like we don't trust the U.S. Or do you think that that's too weenie, liberal of a position? And it's like, no. Like nobody's going to think that. It's just going to be like, hey, this is the world that we're in right now. And the United States is doing
yep.
what it's going to do, and like there's mad respect there, and everybody else is going to go do their own thing. Like where do you fall on that?
The multipolar world is the world where everyone's going to do what they're going to do. That's why it's a dangerous world. But it's also a world where, because normative and ideological issues don't matter, morality doesn't matter, that makes it safer, I have to say. And this obviously shows that I'm a realist, a brutal realist, and many will disagree with me. But I would say that Donald Trump is
Including President Trump and including the supreme leader, because this is a very religious, like ideological conflict on both sides. At least in the way they're talking about it.
not
Like
really.
like go
No,
like
I would disagree, Jacob, because if it was, President Trump wouldn't say things like, look, we bombed Fordo and now it's over. It's time for peace. So I actually think that Donald Trump is the perfect president for a multipolar world.
hmm.
And I would applaud him in many ways on the way he has pivoted the US towards a much more Machiavellian way of thinking about foreign policy. Now, before I get accused of being callous and stuff, let me just break it down. The reason that I don't think Bill Clinton would have been good in this situation, and definitely Joe Biden would not have been, is because every time a moralistic liberal interventionist president was in charge, they don't know when to land the plane. Once you paint a regime as amoral, you need to take it all the way with them. You cannot sit down and negotiate. You need an immoral foreign policy in a multipolar world. That's what's a requirement. You cannot choose what country is good, what country is evil. Because if you do, then how do you stop having an antagonistic relationship with them? How do you sit down and say, okay, cool, look, we bombed Fordo. You know what we can do now. We understand that, we don't want regime change. Like what President Trump said after bombing Iran, and then Hexed repeated it today, that they don't want regime change. That is something that liberal interventionists cannot do. If you have a moralistic compass, how do you stop yourself? How do you say this is enough? We've done enough. You can't do that. You have to say, how many times have we invoked Hitler? How many times have American presidents invoked Hitler as an analogy for some leader they don't like, whether it's neocons or liberal interventionism. And that's where neocons, neoconservatives, and liberal interventionists are the same. They couch everything in the terms of morality, of good and evil. And so if some country is, you know, is going against American interests, you cannot couch it in the words of realpolitik, of realism. You couch it in terms of morality. But once you do that, once you step into that world, how do you slow yourself down? How do you stop bombing Iran? How do you decide that this was enough and now it's time for negotiations and peace? So I would say that Donald Trump is a product of his environment. And I would say that Barack Obama tried to do this, but he was not consistent. As I've said before, I think Obama and Trump are similar in that both of them recognized that the world is multipolar. I just think it was tougher for Obama because he surrounded himself with liberal interventionists who are very liberal, very moralistic, very normative. And they would always kind of say, like, that's what happened in Libya. Look, Gaddafi is a bad guy, but he gave up his chemical and biological weapon program for guarantees of stability. Was bombing him the right message to make? Well, first of all, obviously not, as the Italians warned the West collapse of Libya would lead to a migration crisis in Europe, and they were right. So Italy was opposed to this. Barack Obama understood these risks, but he let France and the United Kingdom take the lead in 2011. So he wasn't, I think, brutal enough. He wasn't realist enough, although he tried to present himself as a realist because his enemy on foreign policy was neocons. President Trump's enemy on foreign policy is both neocons and liberal interventionists. And so I would say that he's a perfect president, actually, for a multipolar era. Now, we will see, right? Is he able to conduct a limited strike against Iran? It will require him to take the retaliation straight in the face like a man and then not do anything in retaliation. In other words, he cannot get sucked in by idiot journalists and taco trade talk and Twitterati saying that he is weak for not responding to something Iran is about to do. And to his credit, he showed that consistency in January of 2020. He orders the assassination, which was illegal by international law, of General Soleimani. Iran freaks out, bombs some American bases in Iraq. At that point, a Bill Clinton, a George Bush, a Joe Biden, a Hillary Clinton, and yes, even Barack Obama does a lot more in retaliation because they have to, because they feel compelled by morality. Our troops were endangered. And President Trump said, of course our troops were endangered. That's par for the course. I understand why Iran had to retaliate. I consider this matter over. That's almost verbatim the tweet he sent after Iran retaliated. That is a multipolar president. You know, that is somebody who can have, and this is why most commentators right now, Jacob, and I know you also disagree, as I do, but most commentators see this as a slippery slope towards a confrontation because they're almost counting on this reflexive need for America to couch their enemies in morality and normative. Like, so the reason this is a slippery slope is now we're going to build a case that Iran is evil and blah, blah, blah. An immoral, amoral president does not have to couch Iran as that kind of an enemy. He can say things like, I respect the Iranians. They're hard negotiators. They should have taken my deal. They didn't. I had to punch them in the mouth. I understand why they're retaliating. I'm ready to talk when they are. And if they cross our red lines, we turn them into a parking lot.
Well, yeah, and this is why it's not a slippery slope because they can't respond. There's no way. Like if they had, if they nuked New York City, Jacob, or if they like blocked the Strait of Hormuz and they could keep it closed for a month, like, yeah, but I don't think they've got, I don't think Jacob, they have any cards.
But see, Jacob, you're looking at this as like an objective analyst, and God bless you. I want to kiss your receding hairline because of it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I love you for it. But the issue is a normative president, whether of a neocon ilk or a liberal interventionist ilk, would have taken any Iranian retaliation as a sign that they're evil warmongers led by Adolf Hitler in clerical robes. And thus, it is a reason for regime change. And thus, it is a reason to smite this evil that has come out of the very heart of the hell and pursue a holy jihad on behalf of human rights. And that's the difference in a multipolar and a unipolar world. The reason that Joe Biden, in many ways, is a very nice guy, great legislator, but the reason he was the wrong president for multipolarity is because I don't think that Joe Biden and his coterie of experts around him would have been able to deftly and nimbly just ignore what's coming out of Iran. Because, Jacob, you and I both know there is some retaliation coming. Some American service men and women might be endangered, might be even killed in this retaliation. Joe Biden can't allow that to happen because he believes there's right and there's wrong. And the truth is that in today's world of multipolarity, I mean, there is still right and wrong, don't get me wrong, but unfortunately, you don't have the ability to respond to every wrong. That is the point, because there's multiple threats. It's a multipolar world, and you, United States of America, may be the most powerful country in the world, but your power is stretched thin around the world, like too little butter on too much toast, to quote J.R. Tolkien.
Yes, it's hard being a ring bearer. I think that's why I think you're right about Obama. Obama got so much flack for the red line in Syria, but that was actually one of the most impressive things he did in the foreign policy of both of his terms, which is he made the stupid mistake about setting a red line about the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons, and then they used chemical weapons, and then the drumbeat started. I remember, I think I was still at Stratford at the time. John Kerry was going on CNN and thundering away about how the red line had to be honored and things like that. And Obama said, we're not no. Well, I'm not doing that.
Jacob,
I'm pulling back.
It's interesting. I would have to say that setting a red line is stupid in a multipolar world. He made a mistake.
But he didn't double down on it.
But he didn't double down on it. And that was correct. He took it in the face. He took the punch. But that's exactly the point. In a multipolar world, you can't be preachy. You can't be going around the world saying Iran is evil. Well, that's your opinion, man. To quote another great movie.
But this is sort of where your argument is on a little bit of because Trump has gotten preachy about this. His red line is no nuclear weapons for this regime, and it's gone from I want a nuclear deal, blah blah blah, to no nuclear weapons. That's his new line.
That's a different issue, though. First of all, it's very clear. It's objective. It's physical. It's materialistic. It's not like we need Iran to change its behavior towards its own people.
Yeah,
he's never said that.
No, of course not.
But that's the issue, because it is a actionable, it is a limited, and it is a clear delineation of what American interests are, and then that's it.
But so was Obama's. I'm just saying it is a red line. Where 3 weeks ago he was nothing. There is now a red line for the United States, and maybe he won't listen. Maybe he won't follow through on it.
Okay, fine. To be consistent, and what I would say is that I do think that Barack Obama also made a mistake for not attacking Syria.
Oh, for not following through.
Not following through, because look, they use chemical weapons. You can just bomb the shit out of Syria and move on. This is my point. Right now, too many people are extrapolating this into regime change, boots on the ground. Why? For God's sakes. Maybe it's because I'm Serbian. Maybe because I watched my hometown burn on CNN live. Maybe because of that, I remember the one example where the U.S. did something limited, and the rest of you just forgot about it because nobody cares about Serbia except when we're, kicking your ass in sports. But okay, look, time out. In 1999, Bill Clinton showed up and said, look, you need to remove your military from Kosovo. Serbs were like, YOLO, show us what you got, NATO. Great idea. Thanks, Slobodan. And then, 3 months of taking it in the face, the Serbs were finally like, okay, fine. They cried uncle. The point is that at no time was the United States of America planning an invasion of Serbia, because they would have had to face a bunch of Jokic and Djokovic's. Fuck, you don't want to do that. So they were like, look, we're just going to bomb the shit out of you until you change your behavior. And this is why I would say to everyone who right now is just saying oh, it's another Iraq. It doesn't have to be. There are ways to use effectively what we call in political science gunboat diplomacy. You steam a gunboat into the port, you show the caliber of your big guns, and then, Yeah, you change behavior of a country. It doesn't have to be a slippery slope into invasions, into regime changes, into American servicemen dying in some random place. The point is, it's in a limited attack. I think Barack Obama should have done that in Syria. I don't see why he didn't. It's because, of course, the demons in his skeleton were left over by the previous administration, and he felt politically that he couldn't do that. I think President Trump has correctly, in a way, I mean, obviously, what was incorrect was letting Israel wag him like a tail, but let's leave that aside. Let's leave that aside for a second. Now that it's happened, he did it, and then what did he flag to Iran? This is very important. He said to Iran, it's not regime change, and this is it. We're done. We are done. You guys can now decide where you take this, but we don't care that you're an evil regime. God bless you for it. Go ahead being evil. Just be very careful how you retaliate against us. That is limited, not immoral, amoral way to conduct foreign policy based on hardened material interests. And I think it's almost a conscious acceptance by America that it's a multipolar world, and you cannot be running around the world trying to turn countries into fucking Wisconsin with your foreign policy, because it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think you're slightly mischaracterizing what Trump said. I think you're like 85% of the way there. But the other part that you've left unsaid, it's not like, okay, fine, you could be evil. He doesn't care about that. But he has also now clearly said, and you're not going to have nuclear weapons. And that I've made it clear since my first term that you're not going to have nuclear weapons. Now, I don't think this is going to happen, but let me throw you a scenario at you, like for devil's advocate's sake. Like,
please.
Let's say the Iranians have a successful test of a nuclear weapon tomorrow after this bombing, after everything that's happened. Like, Trump can't abide that, can
Of course
He's going to have to figure out how to do more.
Yes, that's fine.
So like there is a line here now, which is it's not just go do your own thing, this matter is closed. It's now you will not have nukes. And I've committed the U.S. military to making sure you will never have nukes. Have a nice day.
Listen, here's what I would say. The difference is not that there is no way for this to become a slippery slope. The difference is that that way is not moralistic or normative.
Yes.
And that's but the reason that's important, Jacob, the reason that liberal approach to foreign policy is dangerous in a multipolar world is because it sucks you into a never-ending conflict. Once you identify somebody as Adolf Hitler, once you identify somebody as a Nazi regime, you must intervene and you must spend all your resources on that intervention. That's important. You can you can order a country to change their flag. Don't use green, use red. You can order them to not have a nuclear weapon. You can order them to stop wearing hats for Atlanta Braves and embrace the revolution. That's the LA Dodgers. God bless them.
Please.
And I can't wait for that revolution to spread to the LA Lakers. You will all be wearing blue and purple and gold. God damn it. But listen.
You're welcome for Freddie Freeman, by the way.
Of course. Thank you so much. And also for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Not Maple Leafs, my bad. The Blue Jays, for Teoscar. And of course, let's not forget the Boston Red Sox.
Freddie, if you're listening, I cannot believe you left us for them. I cannot believe
what are you talking about? Mookie, Teoscar, Freddie, Japan.
He could have gone down. He could have gone down as one of the greatest figures in storied Atlanta Braves history. No, you wanted to go home to Southern California.
I'm sorry, Jacob. I'm sorry.
He could still live in Southern California.
Apparently, the epicenter of World War III is a nice place to live, and apparently that helps teams here attract talent. But listen. My point is that this is the key differentiator in a multipolar. You can set all sorts of red lines. They can be stupid still. You can still make mistakes. But those red lines are not whether or not somebody is evil. And my point to you and to everyone listening to this, I'm not an evil person. I don't cheerlead for 21st century like Hitlers out there. The reality is that in a multipolar world, the power of the United States or any other great power is limited. There are limits to that. It's not preponderance of power. You cannot just parachute into some country and turn it into Wisconsin and make it less evil. And so the foreign policy has to adjust for that. And that's where President Trump, I would say, is a perfect president for a multipolar world. What I fear is the Democratic Party, because it does have the Trump derangement syndrome, is going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And listen, let me tell you, like Trump as a baby has got some stinky bathwater. All right, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be thrown out as far as the bathwater is concerned. But the one very, very good thing is that I I think that his approach to foreign policy is going to withstand the test of time, but I do fear that it could be ideologically resisted by the next Democratic president in 2028 or beyond, merely because it was Trump's foreign policy. It's not Trump's foreign policy. It's Metternich's foreign policy. It's Kissinger's foreign policy. It is a foreign policy of anybody who's existed in the past, which is you cannot just identify your adversaries as morally inferior. Because once you do that, you don't know when to stop the war and actually sit down with them and negotiate. It becomes impossible to do that. And therefore, every freaking war then becomes a war of existential proportions, where yes, you do push countries to the brink of existential survival, and then they do all sorts of things in retaliation because you put them to that. That's why this kind of a conflict, this kind of a military action that just happened is unique. And I think everybody listening to this should go and read like President Trump's like tweet. Hagsett's, yes, a press conference. Why? Because America is telling its adversary, we're not seeking regime change. You want to go and like do whatever you want to your people, go right ahead. We think that's stupid. We think you are bad actors. We think you're repressing women, but it's not our place to change that. Good luck to you with that. You know, we think your time is up anyways because you're an amoral country, whatever, but we're not going to punish you for that. We're going to punish you for this thing here, which is your nuclear program. And then we're open for negotiations.
Yeah. All right. Last words. Because I'm on the clock. My last thing is just like, and this is not the thing that's going to like, people want to talk about and things like that. But for me, what's salient when you step back from all of this is that, like you said, probably not World War III, probably not even that big of a deal in the short run. Like probably this goes the way of India, Pakistan, Russia, Ukraine, maybe a slow burning crisis that continues that we all get acculturated to and normalized to. And like that's sort of where I think it's heading. But I do think when you take a step back and look at the world now, the Eurasian landmass is in trouble. Like there are problems everywhere and brush fires everywhere. And the places where there are not brush fires are places like South America. And I know that Southeast Asia is still technically part of the Eurasian landmass, but Southeast Asia looks pretty good too. And Australia, Oceania, like looks pretty good. I wouldn't throw Sub-Saharan Africa in there because they've got lots of problems. But I think if you're just looking around the world for relative stability, like there are pockets of relative instability. It's just not in Eurasia. And there's something happening like across the Eurasian landmass, which as somebody who's trying to step back and not try, because you can fade geopolitics and think about trading. But if you're thinking about frameworks like beyond the short term and thinking about 5, 10, 15 years from now, I think we're actually having in very stark relief where the places of stability in the world are and where the places of instability in the world are going to be. And for me, that's the big lesson here, because we've had all of these conflicts in short succession, in short succession. And like we are also seeing where there isn't conflict. And for me, like that's the lesson, and that's how I'm trying to think about reorienting things. What about you?
So first of all, I'm not going to disagree with you on Latin America and Southeast Asia. I love those two places. I think they're going to do great. However, I do want to disagree with you.
Good.
I think there is a concept of a garrison state. And I think that too many investors and too many commentators just look at the region and they say like, oh my, I don't want to be there. Not a single barrel of oil has been lost since October 7th, 2023. And I'm like the only analyst out there that points that out repeatedly. Not a single barrel of oil has not made it to the global market. In other words, Iran and Israel could nuke each other. The rest of the world can move on. And that's because oftentimes it's in the regions of instability that you find the gems. That's where things start moving. That's where countries realize we got to get better because we're not safe. So I look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia. I look at what's happening in Dubai, Abu Dhabi. Like these are countries literally in the middle of all these rockets go flying back and forth. And I'm not sure that I would not want to like visit those countries or invest or have a condo, like, or go for fun. Like I absolutely would. And I absolutely have been over the last 2 years going in and out, seeing the changes that are happening there. Similarly with countries in Europe. Like Europe is taking the challenge from Russia and is actually doing the right things. Poland, I mean, The Economist jinxed Poland by putting them on the cover of their magazine. but the point, the one thing I think where we agree, I think Latin America is going to do very well, Southeast Asia too. But I think that there's pockets of stability on this brush fire affected Eurasian landmass, and I think that's where innovation, and that's where entrepreneurship, and that's where vigor, and that's where actual productivity will be shown up, because necessity is the mother of all invention. So I like the concept of garrison states, and I want to invest in those.
Gotcha. All right. Before we go, breaking news. You ready?
Yes.
The Phoenix Suns have agreed to trade Kevin Durant to the Houston Rockets for Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, the number 10 pick in this year's draft, and 5 second-round picks. What a poo-poo platter this is. So you can react to that, or you can make your picks for Game 7 tonight before we say goodbye.
Well, I'm definitely, I think Game 7, man. I mean, it's United States versus Iran, right?
Ooh, spicy.
Yeah, OKC, man. The heartland, the MAGA heartland. They just got like stealth bombers and the Canadian assassin. They're just like, yeah, so much more powerful. But hey, man, the Pacers have the Taliban, and my heart wants the Pacers to win. But I do think OKC is going to prove to be just overwhelmingly powerful.
You think OKC looked scared to me?
I know they're young. I listen, man. I know. But would you put money on the Pacers though? That's such a it's a crazy bet. It's going to be it's Oklahoma. Their fans are not going to sit down, and they're just so good. Like SGA is like so good. I agree with you though that the Pacers play with no weight on their shoulders, and whereas the Thunder do. And look, I'll tell you this, Jacob Shapiro, if there is a God, he'll let the Pacers win.
I wouldn't have put money on. I wouldn't have even thought. I thought the Pacers didn't have a chance until Game 6, and now, yeah, I think I might throw some money because like the OKC seemed scared. Like they seemed like they didn't know what to do, and like they really like it's SGA, and like if SGA is not cooking, like who else is there around him who's going to go forward? And I think the coaching aspect here really matters.
Yes,
like I think
totally.
Carlisle's been here before, and he's got the Porsche.
No, he's awesome. He doesn't
going in all directions.
100%. And listen, the reason I say if there's a God, like that team should have stayed in Seattle. They've been cursed ever since. There's clearly like something, but they are. I mean, they won like how many games have they won now? 94 or something. Like it's hard. It's hard for me to see them, but I would love for the Pacers to win just for the, for the Cinderella story of it. This will be, by the way, this will be the greatest upset mathematically in NBA Finals history if it happens. I check. Oh, maybe 2004. Detroit is still bigger. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it also would be a huge victory for the United States over Canada because I mean, we've been talking about multipolar basketball here for a long time, and SJ, if you're going to blow this shit to Tyrese Halliburton from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, like not your Canadian basketball geopolitics not looking so good if you fumble this one, but you're probably right.
All right. Unfortunately, yeah. All right. Well, this was great. Thank you. And by the way, for all you waiting for our long-anticipated trade value, we are going to replicate what Bill Simmons does on the basketball side. We're going to do a trade value podcast at some point when Israel-Iran calms down. We're going to both present our top 30 leaders. And basically the way it works, the politician that's number 1, you would not trade him or her for anybody. The politician that comes 30th, it means that you would trade that person if you were in the country they run for anyone above. So we're going to do that soon. I can't wait. It's just
I can't wait. So Iran, Israel, please stop this nonsense so that we can get to the content that people really need and that is truly important to the future of the US.
I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu should just stop bombing Iran because he wants to find out where we put him on our top 30 leaders in the world if he makes the cut.
Does he make your cut?
I don't know. We'll have to wait until that episode.
All right. I won't spoil anything. Cheers, dude.